Seth MacFarlane is certainly a divisive figure among many, myself included, I'll admit. He's often accused of just doing shock humor for the sake of being shocking, and his animated series are not exactly the most artistic in their presentation. However, that's not to say he's not without his talents, and I wanted to showcase Seth MacFarlane's best qualities. Even going back to his pre-Family Guy days, he directed a very funny short for Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon Show with Larry and Steve. I talked about this cartoon on a previous video about MacFarlane's early work, but the physical humor plus the voice acting from MacFarlane on the titular characters is very good. Larry and Steve, of course, began life in a student film he made, and would eventually morph into Peter and Brian on Family Guy. I may have mentioned before, I'm not a Family Guy fan, though I certainly was when I was a teenager. I grew out of the shock comedy common on the show, and the flaws of the animation are more evident to me now. However, the series is not without its merits, and it's not hard to see why my 14-year-old self gravitated towards it when the reruns started airing. Using skills he learned when he was freelancing as a writer at Disney Television Animation, I found one of MacFarlane's biggest strengths is with character interaction, mostly with Brian and Stewie. Brian and Stewie almost represent MacFarlane's two personality types. Brian is politically motivated and outspoken in his beliefs, but still with an occasional charm and suaveness. Stewie is more brass and unafraid of wallowing in gross-out humor. When Family Guy began, it tended to pair up Peter and Brian, but as the series progressed, the writers seemed to realize Brian and Stewie worked off each other much better. I find the funny moments that still occasionally pop up on Family Guy come not from the famed cutaway gags or Peter being stupid, but rather when Brian and Stewie share the screen together. This is most evident in the Road 2 episodes, which MacFarlane conceived as a tribute to the Crosby Hope Road 2 films, and then gave director and later Phineas and Ferb co-creator Dan Povenmire the freedom to take the characters where he saw fit. This carries on to his films. As hit or miss as I thought the jokes in A Million Ways to Die in the West were, I did find MacFarlane and Charlize Theron had a sweet and natural chemistry, and those were my favorite moments in that movie. The friendship between Ted and John really did give the impression that these two have been best buddies since childhood. But I also give MacFarlane a lot of credit for how he wrote John's girlfriend, Laurie. It would have been so easy to portray her as a shrew, for wanting to give the two of them some space apart. However, we understand why she takes the position she does, and she was not written in a one-dimensional manner. I thought Ted relied a little too much on haha that teddy bears swearing and drinking jokes, and the Giovanni Ribisi subplot was kind of weird, but the little character interactions were what slightly elevated it in my eyes. Same goes for the sequel. Even as the likes of Family Guy tend to focus on crass jokes, Seth MacFarlane has more than proven himself an incredibly witty comedian on stage and in person. I will admit to enjoying his Oscar hosting gig. He was willing to make fun of himself in that position, while also playing around with the nominees in the audience. He managed to keep the show moving, and of course he sang and danced to his heart's content. Seriously, hand Seth MacFarlane a microphone and watch him perform. I know it sounds strange to say this about the man who voices Peter Griffin, but he is the closest we have to a modern-day Frank Sinatra. He is one of those singers keeping big band music alive, and it's no surprise he was selected to voice a mouse with deep pipes in the animated film Sing. He was one of the highlights of that movie in my opinion. He's also been asked to perform classic movie and musical songs for the BBC Proms and John Wilson Orchestra, and he knocks it out of the park every time.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up above. The sun's in my heart and I'm ready for love.
Somebody, please, cast him as Harold Hill in a Broadway revival of The Music Man. He would honestly be amazing in that role. MacFarlane's incredible music taste extends beyond his own singing. For A Million Ways to Die in the West, MacFarlane commissioned composer Joe McNeely to write a score that captured the feel of a classic western, You could just imagine the entire soundtrack for that film in a John Ford Western. In Ted 2, MacFarlane directed an opening musical sequence that felt straight out of an old-school musical, particularly those with Busby Berkeley numbers. I also feel, with complete sincerity, that Seth MacFarlane is one of today's best songwriters. Along with the Brian and Stewie scenes, the best moments on Family Guy remain the musical numbers, which tend to be parodies of pre-existing songs or entirely new compositions. And despite being famous for dirty jokes, he has more than proven able to write songs with completely clean and inoffensive lyrics. His song, Everybody Needs a Best Friend, was a wonderful tune. And I'll be honest, as great as the Skyfall theme was, I was secretly rooting for Ted to win the Oscar for Best Original Song. And I loved Mean Old Moon, the main song from Ted 2, just as much, and thought it also deserved Academy Award recognition. Seth MacFarlane has even said if he were to make a Broadway or movie musical, it would be very old school, and the lyrics would not be laced with his usual brand of humor. And he's more than proven he's able to do that. Whatever is the next movie he chooses to make, I really want it to be a musical. Seth MacFarlane could have made La La Land. Damien Chazelle just beat him to it. And this would never happen in a million years. But I think Seth MacFarlane would do a great job at writing the songs in a Disney animated musical. Think about it. It's not that absurd. So, needless to say, while I find his comedy and drawing skills to be hit or miss, I do think he's an incredibly talented and charming individual with amazing taste in music and one of the best and most versatile voices in the business. See you next time.